Hello, in today's video we'll be replacing a CV axle shaft on the 1995 Honda Civic. We start by loosening the wheel with a 19mm socket while lifting and supporting it with a jack and jack stand. Once it's lifted, we can completely remove the lug nuts and the wheel. And if this happens to you where your wheel gets stuck on the center hub, just grab a rubber mallet and with one nice whack on the tire we'll pop it off. Now once it's off, the first thing we want to do is loosen the spindle nut. But before we can do that, we want to try to bend back this notch that is put to lock the spindle nut in place. Once it's bent out of the way, we want to grab a 36mm socket if it's ever been replaced before, or a 32mm if it's the original, I believe. Don't hold me to it if my memory fails me. To loosen this nut, I jam a screwdriver between the rotor and the caliper bracket so it stiffens the setup, and then I grab a breaker bar. And unfortunately, if you have my dilemma where it doesn't work, you're going to want to use either an impact gun or a cheater bar, which is basically a long pipe for more leverage. This should be done with safety glasses and being very careful. Now once we got it loose, we can focus on taking apart the rest of the necessary parts. Starting with removing this cotter pin by bending it straight and pulling it out. And now we'll use a 17mm socket to loosen the nut. Once we got it removed, I'll use a rubber mallet to hit the lower control arm to hopefully break free the lower ball joint. If a rubber mallet doesn't work, I spray it with WD-40 and grab a good hammer to free it up. I reinstall the nut loosely so it could protect the threads in case I accidentally hit them. And here's my hammer. Let's see how many hits it takes. Well, I guess any of those hits might have freed it up. Now we want to separate the strut mounting fork. The first bolt we gotta remove is this upper bolt, which we need a 14mm socket for. Now that we got the top bolt removed, we can remove this lower nut and bolt using a 17mm socket. And if yours does what mine does, you'll need to hold it on the other side using a 17mm. And now we can push the bolt out, or in some cases you may need to tap it lightly. We can now completely remove the spindle nut. Now we'll want to tap the CV axle free from the center hub. You may need WD-40 if yours has more rust. Now let's remove the mounting fork by pulling it down and sliding it off the strut. Once it's separated from the strut, we can just pull it out. And now let's lift the spindle off the lower control arm. And now we can push back or tap back the CV axle portion holding onto the center hub. Now once it's off the hub, just pull back on the spindle and get the front part of the CV axle off. Now we'll have to separate the other part of the CV axle from the transmission. I put a container down in case any fluid comes out, but if you're only lifted on one side, it shouldn't leak much. And we'll need a pry bar to separate it. Now just slide the pry bar against the transmission and the CV axle, and pry against the housing, and with a little bit of force should just pop out. Now just keep prying out till the axle completely comes out. And now we can completely remove the CV axle. And this is the replacement axle next to our old axle. And you'll want to compare them lengthwise and making sure that the splines match. And if your car has ABS, you'll want to make sure that the new axle has this gear on it. And it does look like these splines match. Now let's check the other end. It does look like these match as well. It does look like the new splines are a little shorter, but the total length is about the same. On this end, I like to put a little bit of anti-seize to keep it from sticking to the hub. And remember that a little bit of this stuff goes a long way, so you don't need that much. And now let's install our new CV axle onto the car. We'll start by putting it into position. We'll want to install the transmission side of the CV axle first. Just push it in little by little till you can't get any further in. To get the last part in, which is that clip, just line up the whole axle straight, grab the middle of the axle, pull back on the outer CV joint, and use that momentum to get it past the clip. And now you'll just want to make sure that the CV axle went in completely. Which this is what it should look like. And now let's get the front part of the CV axle on by pulling away the spindle and getting the axle in position. Now we just gotta line up the splines to the hub and push the spindle in towards the CV axle. And now we can lift the spindle again and drop the ball joint onto the control arm. And now let's reinstall the strut fork. Now we can reinstall the upper bolt, but we don't want to fully tighten it just yet. And next comes the lower strut bolt plus the nut. You may need to pull down on the spindle assembly to line up the bolt. And next reinstall the lower ball joint nut. I lift the control arm with a jack so I can get the strut fork in position as I tighten and torque the bolt. And now let's go ahead and torque the lower bolt and nut. And next the lower ball joint. Now we can install the cotter pin in the hole and bend it to lock it in. If needed, you may have to tighten it a little bit more to line up the hole. And finally, we could tighten and torque our spindle nut. And lastly, I use a chisel to make a bend on the tab to lock it in place. If you left any grease on the rotor, use brake cleaner to clean it off and wipe it off with a towel. And that just about does it for this video. I hope you found it helpful and informative. If you did, please click that like button to support my video and my channel. And please subscribe and ring that bell if you haven't done so.